I woke up in sweats, in the middle of the street. Still, the slight whispers at the edges of my hearing persisted. But my chest was healed. Well, it was mostly healed. I cannot say it was truly healed, for there was an enormous scar spanning from sternum to belly button. It looked like entwined vines covered in thorns. Of course, at the time, I did not see the scar. My mind was too busy trying to figure out if I had died or not. Logically, I knew I hadn't, but I could not comprehend how anyone could survive such pain. Now I knew what death meant. But I decided to get up, although it was not easy, nor I steady, and hobbled towards Toltret's tower, for he was the only one I could think of who could assist me. It was only the wee hours of morn at the time, so naturally he was not up. I knocked upon his shop door, and there was no answer. Not that there would have been an answer, even in the rush hours of the day. Toltret lived on the top of the spire he had built upon his already 3-story shop. He uses the top of those 3 layers for experiments, which often causes smoke of various smells and color to billow out at odd hours. The second floor was a storage room filled with trinkets, baubles, and explosive materials, which he always seemed to have too much of. The first floor, of course, was the shopping center. Once inside, a pen imbued with magic would jot down every item a customer wished to buy, and once a total had been haggled, an enchanted armoset would collect payment, consuming the coin from its helm. As for the spire itself, no one has been in there except the kooky wizard himself. Well, the kooky wizard and I, after this night. As I knocked and knocked upon Toltret's door, a single flickering light appeared at the top of the spire. It rapidly dropped throughout the levels, shining a modest amount of light through the windows. The light seemed to completely disappear, however, once it reached the bottom floor. But the door creaked open, just enough for the enchanted pen to wiggle out. It wrote on the air itself, "Speak." I was taken aback initially, but then I remembered what time it was, who I was talking to, and, well, what I was going to ask. A rude pen seemed all too fair all of a sudden. "I have an urgent matter to speak of with you. I can explain more once I am inside, but I fear I may be cursed," I said to the pen. After a few minutes, the pen began to write again. "Sit." Confused, I looked around to see if a chair magically appeared behind me. None had. So I waited for further instruction. None came, but the pen went inside. I heard the rattling of a chain lock, and the door flew open, nearly knocking me backwards. Inside the entrance room was a rather comfy-looking leather armchair. The pen once again wrote, "Sit." And so I sat. There was nothing particularly great about the armchair. It had solid lumbar supports, it was comfy, and it smelled rather nice, like pine and tar. Nothing happened for a moment, and I wondered if I had misinterpreted the message. Then again, it is hard to understand the full meaning of a one-word answer. Or rather, it would be cruel to give a one-word answer when the solution requires more than one word. Regardless, I sat and waited. After a bit, I noticed that the chair could actually recline, which I was certainly grateful for. Shockingly enough, not dying is exhausting, and so I pulled the lever on the side of the chair and reclined. But reclining the chair was not the only thing that lever did. Suddenly I was flung backwards, stuck to the chair. Through a series of twists, turns, flips, and other stomach-knotting tricks, the chair went through the first floor of the shop. Nearly knocking over brews of many shades and luminescence, the chair then decided to ignore the stairs to level 2, and opted to phase through the ceiling of floor 1. I must admit that I closed my eyes in fear for a while here, as I was afraid of getting a concussion. Just because I could not die with the necklace on does not mean I was not afraid for my own mortal body. Once I opened my eyes, Tolchert's face was mere inches from mine. A cook in the village, with sallow skin on his long, harrowing face. His nose took up most of his face, but so did mine, so who am I to judge? His eyes, though, were always changing color, changing pupil size, shape, changing in a way that you couldn't quite place. Some say these changes are in effect of a spell or ritual gone wrong. Some say it's a purposeful spell. Some whispers around town even have claimed it was because he was a devil. But in this moment the irises were steely gray, and the pupils decidedly human. There was always one constant with his eyes, and that was that they always seemed to gleam. Mostly out of mischief, but they gleamed nonetheless. Without saying anything, or more importantly asking, he proceeded to pull me from the seat. I was shocked and stumbled a bit. An old man like him, who had to be close to 100, should not have been able to move me so easily. By the time I stabilized myself and turned back around, he was sitting in the very leather armchair he had pulled me out of, reclined. What does it take for a man of your credence to knock on the psycho's door in late hours of night when evil deeds are done? I realized I had never heard Tolchert speak until this point. His voice, much like his eyes, seemed to shift as he spoke. First it was wiry and wispy, as you would expect from an old man, but his voice got stronger and more full-bodied as he spoke. Perhaps he was still clearing his throat in the beginning. I seek your guidance. I believe I have experienced something of a magical and possibly malicious nature. I figured you were the best person to talk to about it, since you are the only person in town who has a grasp on magic, and I trailed off, for it was unkind to indulge in the foul rumors I had heard, especially since there was no evidence. But he smiled, or rather smirked, at my hesitation. He had procured a smoking pipe from somewhere, honestly, who could tell except himself. He blew out purple smoke constantly, even when he did not have it to his lips. Between a draught from the pipe, he said, "And because I might be the devil, yes, I am aware of the rumors. The rumors keep business good and keep people out of my business, so I do not mind. Now explain what the situation was." And explain I did, in part. I told him I had a good night rush that allowed me to get a good income for the night. I told him about the bleeding man who spoke in a language I knew but could not comprehend, the fire, the arm, the fingers, the pain, the scar. Tolchert smoked quietly for a moment. I started to get antsy and started fidgeting. I heard them again. The whispers. The same phrase over and over again. I still could not understand them, but I heard them. Over and over. I must have curled onto the ground at some point, because out of the void of crushing whispers came a hand, bony yet warm, that laid upon my shoulder. I looked up and saw Tolchert staring at me, face expressionless. I must have been crying as I started to taste salt, or perhaps it was blood. Tolchert guided me to a wooden chair and shined a light into my eyes. I flinched away from it initially, but was soon overwhelmed with the thought to touch it, to hold the fire within the lantern that held the light, consume it, set it all ablaze. I felt a sharp slap to my face, and the whispers faded. Then the pain began. Aches from every possible joint, a splitting headache, bowels on the verge of spilling out, and, of course, a stinging cheek from where I had been slapped. I looked at Toltret and saw he had gone to a side table where he was pulling out various tools and instruments: scissors, scalpel, thermometer, flask, vials, a candle, lighter, and a book. He took the scissors and cut my shirt. I was far too tired to stop him, but was briefly terrified when I remembered the necklace. It sat above the scar, but just barely so. But even then he avoided cutting the chain. He stared at the scar for an uncomfortably long time. He poked it, occasionally asking if it hurt, which it oddly did not. He took the thermometer and told me to put it in my mouth. After all, he was no doctor. I obliged and handed him back the results. He shook his head and commenced to light the candle. As soon as I saw the open flame, I felt a tugging in my chest towards the candle. Toltret noticed and brought the candle closer, then farther, then to the left, and then to the right of me. It was the weirdest sensation, as if there were another creature that lived within the scar that wished to follow the flame like a moth. Toltret snuffed the flame out before grabbing a scalpel. That's when my body told me to run. No, not my body. The thing that was called to the flame. But my body responded, and I attempted to stand. A Toltret waved his pipe and metal shackles held me in the air, front facing him. He took the scalpel and had almost made an incision when I heard another whisper. This one, clear as day, one I could understand. My body fought against the chains that bound me to the air, and I broke them, a feat I should not have been able to do. But something possessed me in that moment to break material and magical restraints. A power surged through me like I had never known. I felt as if I could do anything. I locked eyes with Toltret with this power surging through my veins and started approaching him, words coming from my mouth that even I did not recognize fully. I was speaking in the language of whispers. I saw my own hand raise, as if to strike Toltret, but I also saw him gesture with his pipe once more. Then everything went completely black. My head hurt. I hurt. No matter what I thought about, all I could feel was pain. I certainly couldn't open my eyes. I sat there for hours, or so I think, until the headache subsided. I felt myself fading once more, and this time I let myself go. Perhaps rest would help. And that's when I saw her. Jane, my first child and only daughter, with her auburn hair and freckled face. When she was born, she immediately became talk of our town, and she grew up too fast for me. Before I knew it, she was a teenager, with almost every boy in town swooning for her. And then she was married. It all happened in the blink of an eye, but I appreciated every moment. Every scratch from playing in the woods, every fight we ever had, and every day I got to see her face, I was grateful for. I could not die, but I could feel pain. And right now, I felt pain within my heart. Literal pain. Like, holy shit, it was the worst heartburn of my life. My eyes flew open and I saw Toltret leaning over me, a finger on my chest, and from his finger came a red glow. And from my chest came black fog, threatening to envelop the red glow from Toltret. That is where the pain came from. It felt as if my flesh was being wrenched from the bone, my organs turned inside out, and my blood boiled. I could not breathe, nor do I think I did breathe for a while, as I sat there for who knows how long. Death was a cruel gambler, giving me immortality in exchange for the show of pain that has been my life thus far. I attempted to move away from Toltret, attempted to speak out against the burn, but no noise came out. and my muscles refused to listen. I sat there helpless as Toltret stared at me, various expressions of concentration and pure disappointment flashing across his aged face. Eventually, he stepped back, and suddenly all my functions returned to me. I could feel again, but it was not very pleasant. My whole body felt like a fizzy beer, meaning drunk, foamy, sloshy, and frankly disappointing. Movement could occur once more, but not in any fashion that made sense. I attempted to lift my arms, but they flopped around as if they were made of squishy rope, as if my bones had been turned to mush. Give it a couple minutes. I had to use a particularly strong holding spell to keep you in place. Whatever it is that's on you, it fights like an ogre. It took me a minute to realize it was Toltret who spoke. Not because I was still hazy in the head, but because his voice had changed. He still sounded aged and wise, but this time he was simultaneously young. A man reaching his 30s is what I would have guessed if he was not standing before me. But it was, after all, Toltret who stood before me, a frail man by frame, but a presence of power and strength. And I was experiencing his power, and I was not having a good time with it. After a few minutes, I was finally able to speak, if not slurring a majority of my words. What have you done to me? What did you do? And what is this thing? And the red light? And why so much pain? All these questions suddenly erupted from my mouth without warning, and even I was surprised by how many of them there were. Annoyingly, he ignored my questions. Instead, he kept rummaging through drawers on this rickety and ancient-looking dresser. Now that I could look around, I realized we were not in the room where I had been knocked out. Rather, we were in a shack that smelled of mildew, mold, and earth. Toltret must have moved me into one of the abandoned woodsman shacks out in the forest. The walls, cracked wood, overgrown with vines, and slanting to an alarming degree, groaned at the slightest breeze. The shack croaked as it shifted, making horrible sounds come from the floor. Speaking of horrible things from the floor, my attention was ripped away from the state of the shack to my hand, where an absolutely horrid creature was attempting to crawl upon my own flesh, a being so horrible I shiver even thinking of it, with too many eyes, too many legs, and horrible mandibles, hairy when it simply should not be, with ridiculous strength, a creature with a nasty habit of making invisible homes suspended, which truthfully only serve as annoyances for any creature bigger to walk through. And getting that stringy material those homes are made of off oneself is possibly the most preposterous and painstaking performance I have ever partaken in. It was a spider, if you could not tell, one of the most foul creatures to ever exist. I found it. Close your mouth. Don't breathe, was the last words I heard before Toltret whirled around to face me while holding what looked like a book. The letters on the cover moved and squirmed, so I could not make out what the title was. But as soon as Toltret opened the book, he spoke in the whispers I had heard before, and a foul grey gas started to pour out. It was so heavy it did not even swirl once it hit the ground. It just clung to whatever surface it hit first. The gas smelled like death, a smell I, unfortunately, had gotten quite familiar with as of lately. After holding my breath for a bit, I had an epiphany. If I could not die, why would I hold my breath? I cautiously took a breath, and didn't die. Go figure. I looked at Toltret while he was speaking in the weird whispers. It sounded like insanity itself, a corruption of everything I could, would, did, and will comprehend. And there it was again. The red glow. It came from Toltret again, but not from a singular finger, but from everywhere that he touched the book. The glow seemed to melt and combine with the viscous grey gas as it crept closer and closer to me. The gas seemed to become more solid as it consolidated within itself, wriggling and writhing on the ground with the red glow pulsing throughout. It crept its way to me. Not crept, slithered. The more torture it spoke, the more snake-like the gas became, and it was headed straight for me. I tried to push myself up, but I was still weak from whatever magic torture had forced upon me earlier. I managed to back up maybe a foot before hitting one of the rickety walls that somehow was keeping the shack together. But the snake was persistent, and I was its prey. It reared up in front of me, bearing gleaming red fangs. It made no sound, or rather it made no sound that a snake should or would be able to make. The whispers got more sinister, with more intent, and yet I could not comprehend their meaning. The whispers echoed in my head, growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling around me. In a moment of panic, I hastily tried to grasp at the snake's neck. It swayed out of my grasp before lunging at me and latching its jaws around my neck. I cried out for Tolkien to stop it, but he kept speaking into the book, and it seemed he was egging the snake on. I felt the ruby-colored fangs sink into my skin. Immediately a surge of energy coursed through my body, and I felt a strange connection to something beyond myself. The whispers transformed into coherent words, and I could understand them clearly. Bearer of the unbroken skull, you have embraced the gift of immortality. A voice echoed in my mind. But with it comes a burden, for the forces of death seek to reclaim what is theirs. You are now bound to the eternal struggle between life and death. Embrace your fate and heed the call of the unbroken skull, and may time be on your side.